Welcome back to this very important lecture. It is about constraints. We already learned that constraints are a small piece of logic. When we do some insertion to our table or updates, it defines if that data will be accepted, rejected, or modified in some way. Important thing to remember is that we do not create constraints with a regular create object syntax. Instead, it is a part of a create or alter table state. On the exam, 5 constraints are covered, which are primary key, foreign key, the not null, the check, and the unique constraint. Let's jump straight ahead to some examples and see how this works. So, first, let's start with the primary key constraint. In the following example, I'm making a table and it has only one column, and that column has a primary key constraint. I'm doing the constraint creation inline in this case. And the object name of the constraint is going to be system name. So the syntax is simple. It is to create the type of the object and the name of the object. And after that, it attributes. Our table has only one column. It's going to be named constraint ID, type of number, and I'm adding the inline constraint, which is the primary key. Let's create this. If we check the user constraints table, which has information about the constraints, we're going to see that the name of that constraint is automatically named. You can see system added a name. It is type of primary key, and it is on the constraint table 1. We can also name the constraint by ourselves. The syntax is very similar. So the inline format will be same as prior, only we added the constraint keyword and the name of the constraint. And after that, the type of the constraint. So let's create this table. Again, I'm going to check the name of that constraint. And we can see that our name is present already. We can also create constraints out of line. So after we define the properties of our columns, we can add the constraint out of line. So after the comma, the keyword constraint, the name of the constraint, type, and in this case, primary key, to the which column it references. So this constraint table 3 example is completely the same as the previous one, only we define it as out of line. So let's execute this. You see it's created, and let's see the name. Again, the result is the same. We can also add the out of line without the naming of the constraint, so we allow the system to create the name of the constraint by itself. Let's do this on this one example. So table 4 is created, and let's see the properties. And we can see the constraint name of that constraint is system generated. We can also add a constraint after of creation of the table. In this example, I'm making a table with one column with the name of constraint ID with the type of number. As we can see, that table is created. So in Oracle, we do not need to have a column with primary key right away. So when inserting data into this table, we could insert multiple same values. So we could have constraint ID 1 and any number of rows with that value. Have in mind for the example. And after of the creation of the table, we can add constraint to it in multiple ways. We can modify the column in this way, as in alter table, table name, modify column name, and we're adding a primary key. In this case, constraint is going to be system name. The following is the same, only this is out of line altering of the table. We are adding a primary key to a column. Okay? And the following example, completely the same, only we named that constraint. So in this case, we would out of line add primary key and it will be system named. And in this one, we named it by ourselves. Let's execute this one and let's check the table. And we can see the primary key is added to. If we try to add again a primary key, the system will error our command. As we can see, the table can have only one primary key. Okay, Let's drop those tables as we are not going to need them. The unique constraint, it's very, very similar to primary key. Think of a primary key as a unique constraint, but only it has to have not null. So a unique constraint can have one null value. For the unique, the syntax is very, very similar to the primary key, only the keyword is not primary key, but it's unique, as stated over here. Another thing to have in mind for the unique and the primary key constraint, that they can be composite. That means that the primary key or a unique constraint can reference to multiple tables. In this example, I'm creating a table with two columns with a constraint ID of type number and constraint name of varchar. Out of line, I'm adding a unique constraint named constraint 3 unique, and I'm referencing two tables. That means that only one value in that table can exist that has a combination of constraint ID and constraint name. So for example, if I add a row to that table with constraint ID 1 and constraint name A, only one row can exist with the constraint ID 1 and constraint name A. Okay? Let's try to create that table. Table is created, and let's see the constraints. And we can see it is created, and the type is the unique. Yep. Let's drop the table as we're not going to need it at the moment. We already learned that foreign key is a constraint through which we connect tables. So a foreign key is a primary key on another table. And by that way, two tables are connected to each other, or they reference to each other. In this example, I'm going to create a table only with one column, which is going to be primary key. So let's create it. We're going to create another table, which is going to have a foreign ID of type of number, and that constraint is going to reference a primary key on the first table. So the syntax is constraint again, the name of the constraint, and references. This creates the foreign key on the foreign ID column. So the references, the name of the table with the primary key, and we have to define which is the primary key. So let's create that table also. And it's created. And let's check the user constraints again. And we can see the constraint name is named as we defined, and it is the foreign key, the R status, which means references. An important thing to mention is that we cannot drop like the main table straight away. We have to first drop tables which have references to that table. If I would try to drop the constraint table, the one that has primary key, which is referenced by other table, this would fail, right? Oracle notifies us right away. But if I drop the one that has foreign key, I can drop the primary table right away. Another important thing is that the foreign key and the primary key have to have same type of the data type. So if I would again create that table, primary key is with number, and I'm going to try to create foreign ID column with type of, for example, varchar. This is going to fail. Oracle straight away notifies us that the foreign key has to have the same collation as corresponding column in the primary key. The not null constraint. First, let's talk a little bit about the null value overall. A null, it's not a zero in, for example, number data type column or empty space in the varchar or char. This is the not existing value. So we do not know what it is, and we cannot compare anything to it. Important thing to remember for the not null constraint is that we can create it only inline. Very, very important. This is probably going to come out on the exam. So the inline constraint and system name, it's again the same as for primary key and the unique constraint creation. Again, create table, table name, column name, type, and the not null constraint. Straight away, we can see that constraint is created. We can also name it, so it won't be system name, same example as before, and we can see it is over here. So the out-of-line addition of not null constraint is not possible. We can only add it inline in those two formats. The same goes also for the alter table statement. So for example, if I would drop that table, let's create it without the constraint. It's gonna just have a column constraint ID of type number. Okay, it's created, and I can see it doesn't have any constraints on it. There are two ways I can add a not null constraint to that call, and it is with the modify as system name and with the modify with the name. But both of these are inline. I'm just modifying the column on the table. I'm not adding a constraint to it. So the add constraint over here on the not null would not work. So let's just try to alter the table. Okay, you can see table is modified. And let's check. As we can see, that constraint is present. Let's again drop those tables as we are not going to. And lastly, the check constraint is a very interesting constraint, as we can make check on the insertion and update on various conditions. In the following example, I'm creating a table. Again, create table, table name, column name, type of the column, and I'm adding a name. So this is again inline adding of constraint. I'm adding a constraint name as check const t1, check constraint, and I'm adding a condition in the brackets. So my constraint ID column has to have value larger than 100 when I'm doing some insertion or update on the table. Let's check this out. My table is created, and I'm gonna try to insert one row to the table. The value inserted is gonna be 99. As we can see, we added a condition or the check constraint, which defines that the constraint ID value has to be larger than 100. So this has to fail. Let's try it out. As we can see, our check constraint has been violated. If I change that to, for example, to 200, everything's gonna be fine, right? And we can see our row is inserted. Into this lecture, I added a document with all these examples shown and additional table with all the constraint conditions. Please do check it out. Try to change the values. Try different examples for yourself, because this lecture is gonna be covered on the exam for sure. I know there is a lot to remember, but it's crucial to have that knowledge. Another note on constraints is that constraints, primary key, unique, and foreign key automatically create an index of an object. This is an Oracle feature. So when we add some values to tables, it can much faster search through those tables. So it's an optimization feature. On exam, there could be a question, how many indexes have been created during the creation of the table? So have in mind this point, that indexes for primary key, unique, and foreign key are automatically created. If we try to create a primary key constraint or foreign key or unique constraint on timestamp with time zone, columns, blob, or club columns, this is gonna fail. This cannot function. Again, please do check the materials provided. Try out yourself everything that has been explained in this lecture, and see you in the next one.